you'll see two films by a brilliant filmmaker that's near me right now, Julie Dash. One is... Yep. Please do that. One is an early work for women, a wonderful choreographic poem, it could be said. I won't delve much into the details, you'll see it. And the other is Daughters of the Dust, one of the, well, in my opinion, one of the most powerful and original works of American cinema in all times. So you're in for a treat. I don't want to influence your experience in any way, so I'll pass the microphone to Julie and say
Thank you very much for coming. So the first film, the short, I made while I was at UCLA. It was a required film, and it's called For Women. I made it, I thought about it many years before I made it. This was long before music videos were created. Before I was at UCLA, I was a student at the American Film Institute, and I took classes with, I think he was a Serbian montage master. His name was Slavko Vorkapic, and he used to talk about movement in film, and so for many years I wanted to do a movement in film. And so then I did For Women when I got to UCLA. Daughters of the Dust was made after I graduated from UCLA right away, and it was, we shot it in 1989, and it came out in 1991. So I hope I remember how to answer the questions, because it was a long time ago.
Yeah, after the screening we'll have a discussion with Julie,
Yes.
so if you have time, please stay.
Well,
and well, have a good screening. Enjoy.
Thank you.
Let us start with For Women. As you've said, you've had the idea of the film and of making it this way long before you even started studying at UCLA. What was the impulse, you know, like why was that important for you?
Well, I like the song by Nina Simone, but once again, it was also listening to the lectures by Slavko Vorkapic, the montages, and I believe he was Serbian. He was one of our teachers at the American Film Institute, and he was 90 years old at the time, and he used to speak so low, they had to put a lavalier mic on him as he stood in front of the classroom. And he just, you know, I was excited about doing movement to music, and once again, it was before music videos. It was really long. It was in the mid-'70s, and so it was just something. It was a challenge.
Yeah. Well, you definitely can see, you know, the play of the dynamic between editing and choreography. And so I guess you had, well, you collaborated with Linda Jones?
Linda Martina Young. Yeah, we met in the hospital. We both had surgery on our knees and, you know, torn meniscus. And while we were laying in the hospital room recuperating, she said she was a dancer. I said I was a film student. And we laid there and said, well, okay, let's do a film together. Yeah. And that's how that happened. Yeah.
And, well, I think you can see the continuation of that work in Daughters of the Dust, because it also is edited well, rhythmically, musically, and edited not the way you typically see, you know, well, definitely you don't see Hollywood films edited this way, but even most of the art films, well, what's supposed to be, what's usually called are not film.
And we were editing film, you know, I edited For Women, and it was not digital, it was celluloid, chemical filmmaking, and I had so many cuts that CFI, a big laboratory in Hollywood, after the first 2 runs, they refused to print it because they were afraid that the cuts would come loose because I was cutting very close. And people weren't doing that then, but I needed, you know, for those double cutting things to happen. So, so yeah, they refused to run it.
I doubt you. Well, I know that you know, digital editing gives you like lots of opportunities, but I kind of doubt you can reach that effect with it. Is the effect that you have here.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
But now you could do it much easier, and it's less dangerous for the machines, for the film to go through the machines with the like 1 and 2 frame cuts. Yeah.
well, I don't know which time I've seen the film now. It's definitely more than 5, but there's always it doesn't stop me. It keeps amazing me how this pretty simple but so powerful decision that you take of making an unborn child, you know. The narrator,
our special
the
effects
character.
were very
Yeah.
primitive, but that's all I could afford. But it was a primitive. When she runs into her, it was like, oh God, I hate to see that part because that's what we could afford at the time. The entire film was made for $800,000, not even $1 million. Yeah.
But what was the motivation behind it?
Let's see, the motivation behind Daughters of the Dust. But there's so many stories that I wanted to tell, and you know, being in film school for all of those years, I particularly wanted to focus in on how African Americans are perceived on film, because you always see we're always siloed. It's that single story, and people didn't know about the Gullah Geechee people, and people always think that, you know, black people have a southern accent. There was a Geechee accent that was being used in the film, and that's why early on in the film you actually see English subtitles, and that was for Americans who could not understand what they were saying in English because they were using the Geechee dialect. So
I guess you could you had to fight for, you know, the right to stay the dialects in the film, because
I didn't really have to fight that much, but until it got distribution, because we didn't get distribution for a year, because it came out. We were at Sundance in 1991, and that's when all of the urban, I call them the urban testosterone films, were being made, and you know, this one didn't get picked up for distribution because people were saying, what is it? Is it a foreign film? And I said, yeah, it's a foreign film. It's right here in the United States, but it's a foreign film. Yeah.
And you have ties to this territory, and
I have parents that come from the region. A lot of Americans don't even know where the Sea Islands of the South are. They're right off the coast of South Carolina and Georgia. And until the 1920s, there were no bridges. So if you were born on one of those little barrier islands, you usually lived your whole life there. So I wanted to take a look at the people who did migrate from the barrier islands to the mainland of, you know, and once again, most of films about African Americans are about African Americans who come from Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, their mainland. And we were different. Yeah.
Do you still keep ties? Do you still visit?
Yeah, I just finished another short film for the Charleston International Museum, African American Museum. My relatives still live there, and everyone's buried there.
Do the islands still keep, you know, this unique specificity of the culture?
Yes. And so now it's not an embarrassment to be from there, but when I was growing up, you know, my grandmother told us not to tell anyone we were from the islands because they were considered ignorant, and we spent a lot of time in the graveyard cleaning graves and things like that you just don't do in New York City or Philadelphia. But we spent a lot of time in the graveyard, and we still do.
And I haven't read it, but as far as I know, you've written a sequel novel to the film.
Yes.
Could you a little bit enlighten us on what's going on there? What is the focus?
I wrote a sequel, the continuing story of their lives in in Harlem during the Harlem Renaissance during the 1920s, and then one daughter decides to go down to visit that place that will not be mentioned, which is it, because she's the daughter of that lady who played Hagar, who was so against all the hoodoo mess and mystery and everything. She was also in Charles Burnett's film, Billy Woodbury's film, Haile Garima's film. Yellow Mary was in Haile Garima's film, and Coralie Day, who played Nana Pazant, he was also in Haile's film and Charlie's film. So we kind of work with the ensemble group of actors that we had been working with for years, and some of the other ones like Eula and Tommy Hicks, they came from Spike Lee's group of actors. Yeah.
Well, there's also a person that worked on your film, which, well, made quite a name for himself after that.
Yeah.
Well, even too, but yeah, I wanted to ask more about Kerry James Marshall,
Right.
who's literally, I don't know, maybe one of the few most acclaimed artists working these days. And
Yes. I think his last film, painting sold for $22 million.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, he did the production design, and everything was, authentic to the period. And then we pushed the envelope a little bit. He was just wonderful to work with. I didn't know his middle name was James, and that's why I just have Kerry Marshall on the credits, and also Arthur Jafer, who was the cinematographer and co-producer and all. Yeah.
And he got a Sundance Prize for the film, I think. No, was it?
Yes, he got Sundance Best Cinematography.
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
yes.
And a few years
All
ago,
natural light.
yeah, and a few years ago, won the Golden Lion in Venice.
Yeah, Venice
at the Art
Biennale,
Biennale. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, obviously, speaking of the work, the collaboration with Kerry James Marshall, it's obvious that the material world of this film, it has an added meaning.
Mm-hmm.
It's highly symbolic, not
Yes.
just to be in the chair where Nana
Yes.
sits. It's such a piece of unusual. Well, you can't. I want to say furniture, but it feels like it's something else.
artwork. Well, also he worked with Michael Kelly Williams, who's also a fine artist. Michael Kelly Williams did do the chair, working under Kerry James Marshall, and they also did the floating. The warrior in the muck that's supposedly fell off a slave ship years ago, and it continues to float in the muck. They built that. They built all of the canoe things, the paddles, and they built the indigo flashback plantation things, and just everything was. He also did the food, the food for the feast. Yeah. He did everything.
I think what has happened to all this stuff?
Tragedy. It was put into storage and lost. So it's yes.
It should be in
It should be in a
these
museum.
days they would put it in the museums.
Right,
Yes,
because everything
Yeah.
was hand carved, hand painted, and everything just gone.
Oh well, yeah, that's really a tragedy. For me, I think the climactic and I guess the most challenging scene to film is the scene of, and I think it's the emotional climax of the movie, the scene of Eula, trying to conciliate everyone by having this sort of, spiritual moment and a rant at the same time.
She was talking about the wounds.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it feels, I know there's cutting of the scene, but it feels so continuous. So could you remember
we had
how,
two cameras, thank God.
How you did it?
We had two cameras when we shot that scene, but we also had a lot of young people and elders who didn't understand. They were not professional actors, and so they were really listening to her, and they just just watched it. It was, I was just looking at it again saying, oh, the eye contact was good. Her performance was so good that they got into it. Yes. Yeah.
You mentioned that it's all natural light.
Yeah.
And that doesn't stop to amaze me, like how do you reach the fullness of the colors? How do you, because light can be an enemy.
Light could be an enemy when the sun, when you're battling with the sun going up and down. But we were on a protected, preserve-like area, and we could not bring lights in there. We couldn't bring anything in over that had more than 3 wheels. So we bought all the props and everything in wheelbarrows. And so we couldn't bring generators. So AJ worked with reflectors and created this gorgeous, Yeah.
It's incredible work. And, well, there's a character that has a unique place in there because he's not from the Pezon family, and I mean the photographer.
Yes.
Yeah, Mr. Sneed.
Mr. Sneed, yes.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
No, well, I just wanted to say how did he get in the story and how did you work on him, because he's sort of the conduit for the audience and the conduit for you, for a filmmaker, basically, in this world of theirs.
Yeah, Mr. Sneed, as well as Trula, the girl that came with Yellow Mary, who there's just so many layers there. They called Yellow Mary yellow because she was light-skinned to them, but then she comes back with someone who's even lighter skinned, black than she is, and so that, that was constantly working there too. But there were 2 outsiders who were, and the outsiders are kind of like the viewers, trying to understand what's going on, what's happening, what's the argument about, why is certain people angry. But specifically for the Mr. Sneed character who came from She's Gotta Have It, Spike Lee's, he represented to me the talented 10th of the time, the educated Negro who was into science and industry and business, and we have the Viola character who's super religious, bringing him so he could do like perhaps a photo essay of the primitive family, her primitive family living in the backwoods of nowhere, and but for me, the important thing was he gets so involved with the ceremony that Nana Pazan's doing in the end. So just after one day, like, he's willing to kiss the hand. He's not afraid of it. It's not hoodoo, voodoo for him. It's just like a continuation of the family pride and legacy. Yeah.
And I always get this feeling while I watch it from the scenes, more and more scenes of him doing the photographs we see using all this, equipment, which is these days basically archaic, you could say.
Right. But he is kind of a show-off because, and I showed that by having him have the flash. You don't need a flash in the exterior, in the sunlight, on the beach. But he's using a flash because it's just like, like in those old movies, Tarzan movies, they come and go poof. It's like he's a magic man, he's impressing Viola, he's.
Well, I wanted to say is like, by the end of the film, his work almost takes on the spiritual quality as well, through him being with them and embracing their way of life and their
because
traditions.
He comes pushing science, the kaleidoscope. He could explain what it is, and it's he's full of himself, and he has the dark glasses on. He's like, the city guy.
Well, before I'd ask if the audience has any questions, I just wanted to ask. The film with years got more and more celebrated, and recently it seemed like it finally got the acclaim it deserved. And but I wanted to ask, what place does it have for you? Like,
what places have it?
Because a film this accomplished and you know, considering all the circumstances, considering the industry, you have to deal with. It can be both a blessing and a curse, you know?
Exactly, because I've gone on to make other films, and then sometimes, you know, someone, a studio person will say, oh yeah, just don't make it like Daughters of the Dust, because for them, it was so foreign that it's just like, so esoteric, and they don't make it like this, ha ha ha, hee hee. But yeah, it had a second life when Cohen Media picked it up and restored the color and did all those things, because it was made, we shot in 1989. So that was like a long time ago. It does have a place in my heart, but it's like looking at an old friend, like a relative or something. It's like, I don't really feel ownership to it. It's just like, that's interesting. I remember the faces, and there's a lot of sadness there too, because Casey has passed away, Coralie has passed away. Even the little boy with the eeny, meeny, miny, mo with the scars on him, he's passed away. The guy telling the story about the Igbo landing, he's passed. There's so many people who have died that, you know.
Yeah, well, I feel that with every screening we kind of honor their memory. We should remember them also. Yeah, so, I'm sure you have questions too, so, and I don't want to be selfish.
First of all, thanks for the film and for screening it here and for being with us. I just wanted to ask to tell you more about your work with Arthur Jaffe, and maybe what were ideas that he brought in.
What I didn't hear.
The ideas that
he brought in Arthur Jaffe into the film. Just to tell more about this collaboration.
He was cinematographer.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, but I wrote it.
I understand. I mean, visual decisions, like, you know, the things that were invented by him, probably. I don't know. If not, well, just like how it was going. I mean, your collaboration, or maybe what were, you know, because it's always a dialogue between, you know, the director.
Well, you know, we were married. So, I mean, we talked about the film all the time, and and we talked about the film. Yeah, with Carrie Marshall, we just sat around and talked about it, and we went down to the location, and we kind of set up an office with all the walls were covered with visual references of what we were trying to do and ideas that we were trying to push forward, and ideas from history, ideas from Robert Ferris Thompson, who was an African-American historian at Yale. He was still alive. So there were a lot of things we were pushing forward, like the whole Kikongo aesthetic, that with the indigo and with the graveyard as a ceremonial place. But these were ideas that you never saw before in other African-American films or films about African-Americans. So we were determined to show that we were not a silo as a person. We were not siloed. There are so many variations of our story, and this was one of them, that everything is different in terms of the historical perspective. So that was like the main goal. Yeah.
Well, firstly, thank you very much for being here. This movie was truly moving, and thanks everybody who made it possible.
Yeah.
I could distinguish a few words that I believe are in the crossroad between Igbo and Yoruba. Eli was worshipping and connected to Ogun, Yemoja, Eshu. Even memory was, well, of course it was a thematic of the movie, and you could see it through this spiritual part of the movie, and that got me thinking about how this process of bringing spirituality and ancestry in the movie came together, because of course it's a very personal story for you and your family. So I was wondering how the music was chosen, and the spiritual thematics that come from, you know, that are the foundation of the movie, how they came about.
Okay. So, specifically with the music that was created and composed by John Barnes, he did it in 10 days, the music, because we didn't have the budget for anything. But when I went to him, I met him. He was actually the older brother of my attorney, and we talked about what kind of music, New World music, should we infuse this film with. Because usually you hear a banjo or someone playing a harmonica in a Hollywood film about black people. But we sat down and said, well, no, if what they would carry, embedded in their DNA would be perhaps music from their home in West Africa, as far as the Sudan, but also there would be music that they would hear played on the Middle Passage in the slave ship. And so that's why we had Pakistani music, santur, even Bilal's call to prayer was kind of Iranian, we just mixed together a lot of different sounds that would be the New World sound. So, even in the end with Elo singing, it wasn't what you normally hear. And we didn't want what you normally hear. We wanted a New World sound that was comprised of different ethnicities. Yeah.
I'll intervene for one short question, because as you mentioned the Middle Passage, and I know your affinity for the research when writing. So these slave ships that they mention, the Saltwater, the Wanderer, they're real. It's not an invention.
That all came from being at UCLA in the University Research Library. I was able to come across, old New Yorker magazine, and they really weren't talking about the enslaved people. They were talking about the nervous breakdown that the captain of the Wanderer had when he saw the Igbos walk into water and drown themselves. So then I started researching Igbos, and then, it was like, Igbos or Calabar Negroes. They would tell you, in 1800s, they would write books about do not buy Igbos or Calabar Negroes because they will commit suicide. They will refuse to be enslaved. Even if you have them chained and you bring them to the ports, they're in bad investment. So I started looking into it more and more. Then I found the story of Igbo landing and all of these things that are very spiritual and very interesting and not really looked at, So I like to do something different. Yeah.
Yeah. Any more questions from the audience? No? Mm-hmm. Well, it's okay. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for showing us these films and for this talk. Thank you.